If you're a Christian, you probably know at least one person, probably more than one, who's decided to leave social media for faith-based reasons. Sometimes they say that social media is a distraction for them. They feel that if they came off, then they could spend more time in more worthy things like Bible study and in prayer. And sometimes they say that it's defiling also. They feel that some of the content and the arguments that ensue in this space are just unedifying, and they just don't want to be exposed to that anymore. These are two of the most common reasons that people give, but the underlying general message when Christians leave social media is that by doing so, they're going to be more spiritual. This is going to benefit them in a spiritual way. They're going to read their Bible more, pray more, and be closer to God. And I've actually seen a Christian saying this. They said, I'm coming out of the space to be closer to God, and you should be thinking about doing it too. So this leaves us all with a question. Are they right? Would Christians be closer to God if we left social media? I think we have to start by saying that all throughout history, this has been a natural impulse for those who want more of God to feel like they have to withdraw from public spaces. This is what monks and nuns were doing for centuries. In fact, they're still doing it today. They decided that to get more of God, they had to avoid distraction from the world and avoid defilement from the world, and therefore isolate themselves from it and withdraw to create an isolated sacred space like a monastery where they could spend all day, every day reading the Bible and praying and meditating. They thought that that would make for a more spiritual life. And there's a thread of truth in that mindset, to be honest. The Bible says that Jesus himself often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. So retreating to quiet places to be closer to God is something that Jesus himself actually did. But here's the thing, there's a big difference between what monks were doing and what Jesus was doing. And the difference is this: unlike monks, Jesus didn't stay in the wilderness. Jesus always came back again. Jesus didn't stay in the wilderness for his whole life in Bible study and prayer and meditation. He didn't stay absent or withdrawn from the world. He simply went there for a time. It was a place to be refreshed so that he could then come back into the world at a later date and continue his work. In fact, Jesus lived by a tidal rhythm, and I've often talked about this. He engaged with the world and then he retreated for a while. He engaged and then he retreated for a while. And it's that same tidal rhythm that he's prescribed for us too. Jesus didn't see the people here as a distraction or a defilement. He saw them as a mission field. He saw them as his purpose, in fact. And so he went to the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the unclean and the people who generally lived in this space. And he would get involved with them and eat with them, and he would bring them the good news. And we should have that same attitude. Jesus told us to go into the world to preach the gospel and make disciples. He told us to go into the darkness to be light. Yes, retreat for a while for fellowship and study, prayer, worship. That's all biblical and good. Do those things. But the point is, don't stay there. Don't live in some enclave all the time. Don't neglect the going. Indeed, this is the takeaway from this whole video. Wherever the public arenas are, wherever people congregate and exchange ideas, Christians should have some kind of presence there too. Now you can probably see where I'm going with this. In our time, social media is a public space. It's where people hang out and exchange ideas. And so yes, Christians should be there too, being light in that darkness. And there is darkness there, by the way. There's absolutely no doubt about it. It's a reflection of our hearts. What people post is a reflection of our hearts. And so people do post unedifying things there. And there are arguments and dramas and problems and the worst of human nature on display. But the point is, that's not an excuse for Christians not to be there. In fact, that's more of a reason for Christians to be there. In the same way that Jesus got involved with prostitutes and tax collectors, we can get involved with atheists and people who just post weird stuff. Of course, live, yes, by the tidal rhythm and switch off your devices every now and then. Have a social media fast. That can be a good thing. But don't make the mistake of monks and nuns. Don't think it's a more spiritual life to live permanently withdrawn from a public space. If you take your light away from a public space, that space simply becomes all the darker without you. Now, just before I finish, I'm going to add a caveat that may undercut everything that I've just said. There are other reasons that you may want to leave social media. Maybe you are genuinely addicted. Maybe it's wrecking your self-esteem. Maybe it's ruining your family life and your friendships. Those are topics and questions for another day though, and they may be perfectly valid, by the way. But today I just want to focus on the spiritual reasons. Don't think that it's a more spiritual life to live permanently away from a public space. Wherever darkness is, Christians are called to be light. That's what Jesus asks of us. And so even if you do leave the social media public space, You still have to make sure that you're engaging with these distracting and defiling people somewhere else in your life, because this is your mission field. Charles Spurgeon said it well: controversy is never a very happy thing for the child of God. He would rather be in communion with his Lord than be engaged in defending the faith or in attacking error. But the soldier of Christ must follow his master's commands. And as C.T. Studd also said, some wish to live within the sound of church or chapel bell. I want to run a rescue shop within a yard of hell.